It's time for Fresh Oil with singer-songwriter and pastor Keith Manley, a program designed to minister the gospel of God's grace and to bring fresh oil to the brokenhearted. And now, with today's program, Pastor Keith Manley.
Hello, my friend. Welcome back to Fresh Oil. I'm Pastor Keith, and today is day 5. It's the final episode in the series I've been teaching for the past 4 days, and today will be the 5th day entitled Forgotten Women of the Genealogy. And this deals with the 5 women that are placed in Matthew's genealogy of Jesus Christ. And I want to begin today by asking you to take a moment with me and let's just look back at the last 4 days and all the things that we've seen as we weave these 5 faces, these 5 stories together, so you'll understand something about the gospel that no single story could have told you alone. We began with Tamar, a Canaanite woman, twice widowed, with a covenant promise that had been made and broken. She waited for years in her father's house, wearing the garments of grief. And when no one came to fulfill the obligation they owed her, she acted with the courage and the shrewdness of someone who understood that the covenant mattered more than appearances. The man who nearly had her burned to death declared her more righteous than himself, and her son Perez, which meant breakthrough, he carried the royal line forward. And then we met Rahab, the prostitute of Jericho, the woman who had lived behind the wall in every sense of the word. She had heard the reports about the God of Israel, and instead of dismissing them, she believed them. She hid the spies. She hung a scarlet cord in her window, and she sheltered everyone who sheltered with her. And she walked out of the rubble of Jericho into the midst of God's people, never to be on the margins again. And then there was Ruth, one of my favorite stories, the Moabite widow who clung to Naomi on the road with the full force of hesed, which it means mercy or loving kindness, that stubborn covenant love that doesn't let go when it has every right to. And she followed Naomi to Bethlehem. She gleaned in the fields of a kinsman redeemer named Boaz, and she was lifted from poverty and foreignness and grief into the full standing of a daughter in Israel. And then the last show we did was about Bathsheba, the woman whose name Matthew withheld, whose husband's name he kept, because of the story of what David did must not be forgotten, and because the story of what God restored must not be minimized. She buried a husband and a son, and she sat at the right hand of the king. She's the mother of Solomon, the ancestor of the Messiah, and her pain was real and her restoration was complete. Now today we come to Mary, and in Matthew 1:16, Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. Notice the grammar here, because the grammar is doing theology. Every other verse in this genealogy follows the same pattern. So-and-so begot so-and-so, and so-and-so begot so-and-so. Active verb. Father to son to son to son. But here the construction changes completely. It says, of whom Jesus was born. The Greek here is passive. It is not Mary bore Jesus in the active sense, but Jesus was born of Mary. And the genealogy itself is pointing its finger at something unprecedented. This birth was different. This was not simply a man passing his seed to the next generation. This was God entering human history through a body that belonged to a young woman from Nazareth. And the grammar of Matthew's sentence, it bends to accommodate this miracle. Luke 1 tells us she was a Parthenos, that is a virgin, young, betrothed to a man named Joseph, who was of the house of David. Betrothal in the first century Jewish culture was not what we call engagement. It was a legally binding marriage. So from the moment they set the cup down and became engaged, at that moment they were actually considered married. I met a young girl years ago in Israel. Her name was Samira, and it was explained to me that she was divorced. I said, how long were you married? Oh, I was never married. She was engaged. She was betrothed, and it took a divorce for her to break that. A writ of divorce was required to dissolve an engagement. And the betrothed couple did not yet live together, but they were legally one another's in every other sense. A sexual violation during betrothal was treated as adultery. A pregnancy during betrothal that could not be attributed to the husband was cause for public scandal, and under the law, potentially for death by stoning. Mary was perhaps 14 or 15 years old, it's estimated by Bible scholars. She lived in Nazareth, which was a small village where everyone knew everyone and everyone talked. And into this world, into this season of her life, the angel Gabriel came. And the angel's first words, Kyrie in the Greek, rejoice or greetings, highly favored one. This is a perfect passive particle, and the tense is very important. She's been graced. It is something that has already been done to her. The favor she has been given is not based on merit, not something she accumulated. She didn't earn this assignment. Grace, by every definition, is always like that. Grace is when you get something you don't deserve. Then the angel told her, you will conceive in your womb and give birth to a son, and you shall call his name Yeshua, Jesus. And he will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give you the throne of David his father, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Yeshua, in Hebrew, it means God's salvation. And Mary asked one question, not why me, not can I have time to think about this, not what will people say. She asked one question. She said, how shall this be, since I do not know a man? It is a practical question. She's not doubting the messenger. She's not refusing the assignment. She's asking about how this is going to happen. She needs to understand how the biology works when the biology has not worked yet. And the angel answered her with one of the most theologically dense sentences in the entire New Testament. He says this, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the Holy One who is to be born will be called the Son of God. Now, Mary was being told that what happened to the tabernacle in the wilderness was going to happen to her, that the God who came down and tabernacled among the people in the tabernacle, who lived among the people of Israel, would come down and tabernacle inside of her. She would become a tabernacle where the Word would dwell in her, be born in her womb. Literally, John 1:14 would later say, the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. And then Mary spoke, and her words have echoed through 20 centuries and will continue to echo as long as there are human beings willing to surrender to the impossible purposes of God. This is what she said, behold the maidservant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word. Wow, I want to break that down. Behold, here I am. It's a word of arrival, a word of presence. In Hebrew, the equivalent word is hinene, and it was Abraham's word on the Mount Moriah when God tests him, and it's Moses' word at the burning bush when God spoke to Moses, and he says, here I am. It is Isaiah's word in the throne room when he says, here am I, send me. And it's Mary's word, behold your servant. Let it be to me according to your word. Here I am, Mary is saying. I'll do what you want me to do, God. I'm fully present. I'm not hiding. I'm available. The maidservant of the Lord. Wow. The Greek word is doule, which is the form of doulos, which was the word for slave in the Greek. And Mary didn't say that she was God's helper or God's assistant. She said, I'm your slave. I'm your property. Do to me as you like, God. The one who belongs entirely to another, whose life is given over to the master's purpose, not her own. It's not low self-esteem. It's the highest possible theological self-understanding. Paul calls himself a doulo of Jesus Christ. He said, I'm a bondservant. I'm a slave to Jesus Christ. In almost every epistle, Paul brings out the fact that he is a slave to Jesus. And then she says, let it be to me according to your word. Not according to what I understand, not according to what I can explain, not according to what will be easy or safe or socially acceptable. She said, according to your word, whatever you have said, let that be what happens to me. Now, I want to make sure we fully understand the full cost of what Mary just said. She was betrothed to Joseph. And when she appeared pregnant, Joseph, a righteous man who didn't know the full story, planned to divorce her quietly so not to expose her to public shame. He believed at first the only thing he had any evidence to believe. Mary knew this was coming, and she said yes anyway. She was going to be talked about. In a village as small as Nazareth, people would be counting the months. And a young betrothed woman appearing pregnant before she and Joseph had come together, that story would never fully die. There would always be people who didn't fully believe the account, who raised their eyebrows when Jesus walked by, who whispered, like John 8:41 records the Pharisees who said, "We were not born of fornication." That implication itself directly was aimed at his birth. Mary carried that whisper for the rest of her life. And she carried something even heavier when she brought Jesus to the temple 40 days after his birth for his purification rites. An old man named Simeon took the child in his arms, and he blessed God, and then he turned to Mary and he said this, "A sword will pierce through your soul also." She did not know what that sword was. She didn't need to. She had already said yes. But she would stand at the foot of the cross 33 years later and discover exactly what he meant. Mary said yes to all of it. I just recently wrote Mary's biography in my biographical novel series, and I pointed out that so many times while Catholics have elevated Mary to a position God never intended, they pray to her, they put her on this esteemed position, and she's pictured with statues. But we, in the Protestant world, we have kept Mary at an arm's length, not understanding what an amazing woman she was to say yes to what God asked of her. Now, I want to draw all 5 women together now as we close this series because Matthew included all of them for a reason, and that reason is the gospel itself. Tamar was a Gentile who fought for covenant inclusion when the covenant keeper had abandoned his post. Rahab was a prostitute from an enemy city who believed the reports about God and was saved by a scarlet thread. Ruth was a Moabite widow excluded by law, whose hesed, grace, mercy, loving kindness, made her more faithful to Israel's God than many of Israel's own children. And Bathsheba was a woman caught in the machinery of another man's sin, who came out on the other side, sitting at the right hand of a king. And Mary was a young Jewish woman who said yes to the most impossible assignment in human history with nothing but an angel's word as her foundation. What do these 5 women share? Not nationality. Only Mary was Jewish. Not moral perfection. Several of these stories involve profound scandal. Not social standing. A widow, a prostitute, a foreign gleaner, a king's victim, and a carpenter's wife. Not ease. Every one of them faced public shame and personal grief. What they share is this: each of them in their own moment trusted God when trust was an unreasonable choice. Each of them held to something, a covenant, a covenant claim, a scarlet cord, a kinsman field, a murdered husband's name, and an angel's word when everything around them argued for letting go.
What if the family tree of Jesus wasn't filled with perfect people, but broken, scandal-marked, courageous women? In The Genealogy of Hope, 5 women who changed everything, author Keith Manley brings to life the powerful stories of Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary. 5 unlikely women woven into the lineage of Christ. A woman who risked everything for justice. A prostitute who chose faith over fear. A foreigner who found redemption. A grieving mother who carried sorrow, and a teenage girl who said yes to the impossible. This is not a genealogy of perfection, it's a genealogy of hope. Discover how God writes straight with crooked lines, and how your story can be redeemed too. The Genealogy of Hope by Keith Manley.
Check out my new book, The Genealogy of Hope, available now on Amazon.com in hardcover, paperback, or the Kindle ebook.
Thanks for joining us today for Fresh Oil with Pastor Keith Manley. Fresh Oil is an outreach of Grace Family Church in Rockford, Illinois, and can be heard each weekday at this same time. You can reach us online at weneedgod.com. Until next time, remember, God's love for you is unconditional, and He makes His mercies new every morning.